Great. So Lee, thanks for joining us. First up, I want to ask you a question about your role at Mars. And obviously it's a huge organization globally, employing more than 100,000 people. And that must have just caused unfathomable challenges for you through the COVID experience so far. What do you think the single biggest change that will have for an organization of your size going forward in terms of how you communicate?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is unfathomable. I think, when you're managing any business, particularly a business like ours, that's very complicated and big and global, there's a lot of complexity in how you run your factories safely, how you supply the right things at the right time, how you keep stores open. So I think there's a lot of complexity. There's also, I would say, some complexity that's come out as well. If you think about, we used to have over 1,000 people a day sitting on an airplane somewhere in the world. We don't have that anymore. We're actually running our business ostensibly on a single common communication platform, which is a remarkable thing. And I think to an extent, it's kind of leveled the playing field when it comes to communication. So for me, we're talking to 125,000 people much more regularly and much more intimately. I think for me, the biggest change will be just how seriously internal communications is taken. I think if you look at a lot of the big media stories, particularly the first 3 months or so, they were many internal stories that actually got reported externally. And I think that's pretty telling, I think, in terms of the importance of internal. I think we'll be able to do more open, regular communication. I think we'll use the technology much harder. And I think really importantly, we'll blend internal and external together in a way that we haven't really done, which I think will remove some of the silo thinking that we have, where we think about internal and external separate. I think it's all going to become one going forward and integrated.
Great, and that leads us very nicely actually onto the next question around that integration piece. I mean, thinking about how big businesses, again, like yours, manage campaigns as a whole, and we've talked about the integration of internal and external comms. Do you think integration more widely than that works in practice? I'm thinking particularly between the disciplines of advertising, marketing, and PR, so beyond core comms disciplines, or is it just structurally impossible in a big business like yours?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, it absolutely is possible, and it's the very best of what we do is when we get that to work. But it doesn't always happen. So I think it's a great question. I think about it like going into a kitchen. You've got certain ingredients you bring in, expertise on brands, PR, advertising. And then you've got different cooks, different people, styles, relationships. But the most important thing in the kitchen is actually what you do, like how are you going to blend the things together? And I think as long as people are really, empowered to do what they need to do, are clear on ways of working and processes, I do think it's really possible to then kind of collectively just all focus on the most important thing, which is why somebody should care about what you're doing. The consumers, ultimately they've got a choice. They just want products that work. They want brands and campaigns that entertain, that are interesting, that maybe drive them to action, and they'll decide. They don't really care about the functional silos of how we came up with the idea. If I think about a good example of that in the world that I'm in, we used to have separate social media and PR budgets that sat in communications. And ultimately that gave you a challenge. As an in-house team, you had basically already 2 silos before you even started. Over time, what I found was giving those budgets and responsibilities into the brand team and the CMO actually really empowered everybody to make better decisions, better trade-offs, and actually increased our influence on the earned pieces and the social pieces. So I think sometimes, you think that having the money is the most important thing. Actually, I don't think it is. I think the on the agency side, because the in-house side is really critical, I think, to set the tone. I think there's a couple of things. There's one, everybody getting involved as a thought leader in the very execution of the idea, if you like, the conception, the brief even. And then I think also what I look for agencies to do is to not play just in their own swim lane. I think it's really important now that every person around the table has to represent the views of kind of earned reach and paid reach and own channels. They're all equally important. And I think the idea is you get the very best idea in the room from the group that you've got. And I think that's absolutely possible if you integrate the work in the right way.
Great, really interesting. And switching to something completely different now, you've been at Mars for over 25 years, which I'm sure is something you wouldn't have imagined when you started back in the 90s. But what would you tell your younger self now setting out on a career path through communications?
Yeah, well, I mean, apart from buying some Apple stock and getting a Brooklyn, which would have been nice, I think certainly I wouldn't tell them anything about joining communications. I think I'd be a bit confused, my younger self, as to what that might mean. And I think it would probably drive me to make different choices. Actually, I might think that I need to be in communications sooner than I was. For me, the career has been about leading lots of different types of functions and businesses, which is where I think I've really grown. And we talk about Mars being the ultimate business school, and I think that's certainly what it's been for me. If I then think about, well, what would be the advice? I think certainly I would firstly say, just slow down, enjoy those moments, those days, because the years do go by very, very fast. The career skips by fast. And it's really in those moments and the learning you get and the people you meet. I've certainly learned a lot more doing a job for 3 years than I have for skipping between 3 jobs for a year each. And I think that would be certainly something is to take my time. And then secondly, I think, something I did when I first started my career was I used to think work and life were quite separate. And I, kind of had a workly and a non-workly, and I tried to kind of bring the two together on occasions. But I think what I found a few years into my career is if you want to be a true leader, if you want to bring your passion into everything you do, you need to integrate, work and life. It's not a balance, it's actually an integration. And the most important thing you can do is to be your whole self, show up fully, and then you can try and have fun in everything you do, not just in one part of your life or another. And I think that would be a big learning for me earlier in my career.
Great, super interesting. Lee, thanks a lot for joining.
Pleasure. Thanks, Mike.